Welcome to the Spirits Business Hub, those of you who are joining us for the first time, and welcome back if you have been to a couple of our sessions already. We're on to our second of 5 talks we have planned today, and I'm delighted that we are joined by Rob Hollands, who is CEO of Proof 8. We have a lot of ground to cover today in terms of technology, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into the conversation. But to begin with, could you tell our audience a little bit about your experience and how you came to work in the spirits industry?
Yeah, love to. Thanks, Melita. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. As you say, just turned into lunchtime, so we'll speed through. But Rob Hollands. I've originally come from the kind of marketing agency world, built a digital company almost 20 years ago now and sold that to a big US group. And that started my transition, I guess, into more the technology world that we live in today. And along that journey, I've done lots of work with the bigger kind of drinks holding companies, I guess, the Diageo's, Campari Group, Pernod's, to look at how digital can transform their businesses, to look at things like IoT and connected products and connected packaging, to look at how they can better digitalize their supply chain and innovate in those spaces. So lots of experience there. Now run a technology SaaS company called Proof 8, and we're working with distilleries, with production companies, with manufacturers to help them weave technology and innovation into all that they're doing.
And you mentioned SaaS there, software as a system, which is something that I only came across kind of more recently last year when you and I started speaking and working together. Could you explain how at Proof 8 you use that to kind of improve and help how our industry works?
Yeah, definitely. The beauty of SaaS is that it's something that you can take in pieces when you need it. It's you can kind of log into a system online and start a subscription, as I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with, whether you're using Google or other services there. And the benefit of that is that the barriers to entry are really, really low for companies to come in and transform what they're currently doing internally. And that might be a distillery that's tracking their production on Excel sheets, or a warehouse that's managing maturation on a Google sheet, or maybe even still on paper records. So the beauty of some of the things that we're doing is we're providing the tools, the digital tools that we're familiar with in our normal lives, to help these businesses operate more efficiently, digitalize their operations, get better data, connect with their end consumers somewhere down in the supply chain, with a massive belief. You know, we're not out, we're obviously selling a product, but we're not out there to massively sell a product. But we do see this, like lots of industries, as an industry that's been traditional for craft and lots of heritage and lots of kind of offline methods and production things, that is ripe for more digital transformation whilst retaining all that kind of heritage and craft, I guess.
And last time we were speaking, you mentioned how throughout your career, you know, you were sort of at, in the early stages of your career, saw the big growth of the internet and how that really was such a fundamental change to how the world operates. And now we're again in, I think, another kind of digital revolution with the development of AI technology. Which of the two do you think is maybe most significant in terms of how quickly the development has come about and how much it can change how we work and how we live?
Yeah, it's definitely faster this time round. I always thought so the first company that we set up was kind of bang on the second wave of the internet. The kind of bubble had burst and everyone had gone away and built the real use cases, and then we were out getting practical things to market. And I remember coming out of the back of that time, we sold our business to this big US group, and I thought there will never be another opportunity to jump on a transformation like that, where things are being created, kind of stuff's happening so rapidly. And I think we've had a few of those. We then had mobile and social, much smaller changes, but the revolution that's going on with AI, and I was at the Paris AI Summit a few weeks ago, and it's just wild. It's happening so fast. It's like the internet did at the same time. It's changing businesses and organizations as quickly as it's changing consumers' lives. And I think that's when you know you're at one of those moments. It's impacting us on every level, in every department. I mentioned Diageo. I had a meeting there a few weeks ago. I met one of the chaps there that's looking at their kind of how they approach AI internally there. And it's just amazing that it's every department, whether it's in HR or it's in marketing, the bit that we might see more of, or it's in production. They're having to consider it across every facet of the business. And that for me makes it as big as the internet revolution that we saw then. I'm sure there will be some bursts and everyone will look back and go, this is crazy. That didn't really happen. OpenAI hasn't succeeded, whatever it is. But we will come out of the back of that, and this will be looked back as another massive revolution.
I think it's a really exciting time in terms of digital development. And as an industry, I mean, during COVID, if we think back to those times when we first went into lockdowns and we had to really change how we worked, I think it really came to light how behind at the time we were in terms of e-commerce in the alcohol industry. We're about 5 years past that now. Do you think the spirits industry is behind when it comes to embracing technology?
It's a tough one. Truthfully, I think in terms of production technologies, the industry is quite innovative. And that probably goes back down to the fact that we are an industry that's very, very focused on the beautiful liquid that we create and that craft and that tradition and heritage. And now that is super, super important. But I do think in terms of the kind of consumer touch points in innovation there, or in the technology that we adopt into our businesses, the industry is behind. And that you use a brilliant example in terms of e-commerce, and in some cases we've still been behind. We've constantly trailed other innovators in that space. There's been some great tests. There is some great progress going on in AI, but I think this presents a big opportunity. One of your other panelists earlier said it brilliantly. And when there's tough times, when there's all of these things going on, that presents the flip side of that is an opportunity to really capitalize on something. That's the same now with what's going on in technology innovation. Now is the moment where there is an opportunity to jump in and be more innovative, get better stand out on shelf, create a more efficient production process, whatever it is, technology can help with that.
And you mentioned innovation, and just before we sat down here, you mentioned quite an interesting study that you came across about in times of hardship. That is the time to really innovate. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great. It's actually slightly older now. It's a McKinsey 2020 report that looked back at all the recessions that we've had over the last 50 years, I think. And they tracked the top 50 or 500 actually, top 500 most innovative companies in the world that continued to innovate during those times of recession or massive disruption. The political disruption that we have at the moment as well. And those companies that it continued to invest in innovation came out with a 30% higher worth at the end of that period, entered and exited that recession period 30% in a better position. So that goes, and the whole McKinsey report, it's a brilliant report. Perhaps we can share a link or something afterwards that talks about the need to innovate and actually the massive opportunity when there's recessions, when it's difficult times, when there's political instability. That is a big opportunity to innovate and disrupt rather than batten down the hatches. And
absolutely. And I think 30% is such a huge difference as well. So I think it's really, the panel before, they were talking about the importance of being agile and adapting and kind of rethinking where you need to, because it's so hard to make a long-term contingency plan when things are a bit volatile. So I think that's really, really great to hear. And at Proof 8, for anyone who's maybe not so familiar with what you do, can you go into detail about the services that you offer and share examples of how you are able to digitalize ways of working for the better?
Yeah, definitely. So a tiny bit of background on Proof 8. We originally tried to enter the whiskey space, actually. So lots of us are technologists. We've now brought in brilliant drinks people from lots of the brands that you'll know to support the knowledge on that side of things. But we originally saw a massive opportunity in being able to invest in this space and built a marketplace. People remember things like NFTs and blockchain. So we have a lot of expertise in that area as well. But we built a marketplace to allow the trading of spirits. And that was our first entry in. And like all good startups, we've quickly pivoted into a totally different business to what we were back in 2021. And that was because of a realization, actually, that when we started to delve into this industry, we realized that most of the supply chain was actually analog. If you went into a distillery, even the big players, a lot of it is Excel based, or it's using a kind of custom built system, but very analog or paper records in lots of warehouses and distilleries as well. And the thought was, look at what software has done to other industries like that. Couldn't we start to look at what elements of this industry we could digitalize? And where we arrived today is we're building the most digitally connected distilleries on the planet, the most connected warehouses on the planet, by enabling those customers with great software. And that might be tracking all of the production process, which if you track it all, if you digitalize it all, you can then look at, okay, what can I make more efficient, or where are the gaps? We start to get that really valuable data out. In warehouses, that might be better space optimization. So if I can fit an extra 1,000 barrels or casks in this warehouse rather than building a new facility, because the software, AI, whatever tool it is, has told me that makes you far more efficient. And then on to the customer. If we've connected this entire supply chain, what can we tell the customer about that product that they didn't know before? Suddenly I can tap into my bottle of Johnny Walker and meet the master distiller that distilled it on this particular date in time and see where that product's been for its whole journey. So building valuable experiences for the distillery, for the warehousing, for distribution, but also for the end consumer.
And you mentioned about sort of switching from the more traditional analog ways of working, such as Excel sheets, to more digital means and more efficient digital means of working. Can you go into a bit more detail about the risks that are maybe associated with continuing down the more traditional routes, and why it would be of benefit, in your opinion, to embrace a more digital and efficient way of doing things?
Yeah, definitely. There's probably two things here, actually, because there's one, the risk that you get. So, bad data entered in, lost data, all of those things that come from using more traditional systems. Also, we know it, massive inefficiencies, digital, people love and hate this stuff, but digital has made stuff far more efficient in our day-to-day lives. It can do that for distilleries and in our business lives as well. And that better data. But there's also tons of regulation. In the UK at the moment, there's been lots of changes with HMRC, which has changed the way that warehouses report. By having that stuff digitalized, we can quickly adapt on a system level to rules and things that technology is really good at doing. We can do that and far more efficiently than trying to adapt all of your kind of paper-based systems. And there's more regulations coming across Europe, the US as well, where that's driving the need for greater transparency, which digital provides really well. It's not kept in an Excel sheet, hidden away. It's on chain, not online for the public to see necessarily, but certainly if it's interrogated, you can look at it with a real proof of what's been going on with that product. And far greater traceability. On some of the distilleries we're working with, we trace every ingredient coming into that distillery, and we trace them right the way through the journey and into the bottle. So you've got that real truth of provenance and transparency from the brands, which there's a demand for. We know, I think it's 90% of consumers are more likely to spend more with a brand that's more transparent. There was a stat in another report. So there's the consumer demand. All of this stuff goes back to, we're building things that either customers need or consumers. It helps consumers' lives or adds more value to the relationship.
And transparency has been such a big talking point in the industry, and it's something that comes up again and again and again, no matter what category you're working in. How important is it from your perspective and from the work that you're doing? Like, how much demand is there to give customers more transparency about what they're buying and what they're drinking?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, actually, because we've done a bit of research on this as well. And the actual perception of how much consumers demand transparency is higher than the actual truth of it. A lot of consumers will say, I want to buy from a brand that shows me all of that transparency. But the actual, it's not so high up there. They want the right product at the right price with the right storytelling. But it's certainly in that list. It's a requirement, and that means why it's not had perhaps it's not as important as we've all made out. It is a requirement in a consumer deciding profile. So I just say that because sometimes it's a bit too hyped, this transparency stuff, and I rattle on about it as well. But it is a little bit hype, but it is an important factor. And with the regulatory stuff as well, it's coming. So that's one of the things where I think it's really easy for distilleries to be more transparent now, to use software like ours, and there's other players out there to track more of what's going on in their operations. So that's almost, that requirement just needs ticking, whether the hype's there or not.
I think it's really interesting that you raised that, actually, because as I said, we do hear about transparency, but it's, I think, valuable to hear that it falls maybe lower down the list, but it is an important quality. And one particular area where we hear a lot about transparency is with the rise of whiskey cask investments, of course. And you are able at Proof 8 to kind of help that transparency story. So from that perspective, can you share a bit about the importance of using tech to our advantage to make sure that, you know, that part of the industry is as transparent as it can possibly be?
Yeah, definitely. We've done loads of work, and we basically have solved the problem. I don't usually do too much sales pitchy stuff, but we have solved the problem for this transparency and authentication of ownership in the cask whiskey space really easily with blockchain technology and NFTs that can say that I immutably own this asset and I can prove I own that. We're just starting to take that through to a bottle level as well. So you could take that bottle and put it into your virtual whiskey cabinet if you wanted and prove your ownership of it as well. But certainly at a cask level, there's great technology for that. And actually, that's an interesting area, because all of these, I talk about NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which people will be aware of perhaps, and blockchain technology. We talk about AI, and all of these things go on a hype cycle. And you look back at 3 or 4 years ago, and you might have been paying $2.5 million for a gift that some kid in his bedroom had created via an NFT. And of course, that's not sustainable. That's pure top of the absolute hype cycle, and that artwork is never going to be worth that. Sorry if anyone sat in the audience that had the funds to buy it, but truth of it is, I don't think that's ever going to be worth that. There are other pieces of art that would do well from NFTs, but this idea of this hype cycle, and then what happens is everyone goes, oh, it's a load of rubbish, it will never work. And that's happened again and again, happened with the internet. There's countless articles in newspapers that said this internet thing will never take off. And then it goes quiet for a while, and that's usually when everyone's gone away. All the tech companies are going and building the real world use cases, going, actually, this is brilliant technology. How could it be applied? What really are the friction points in the customer journey that we could use this tech to solve? And then all of a sudden you start to see the real world use cases start emerging, and NFTs for proving that a real physical asset exists and can be owned and traded easily are one of those kind of use cases that just makes sense. Same for real estate as well. There's massive disruption going on in that space using that same technology.
It's funny you say that about the kind of cycle that you see of like it becomes very popular and then goes a bit quiet and then it comes back again. Because a couple of years ago, I was doing a talk at another trade show, and someone came up to me at the end and asked about NFTs and what we had been seeing in that part of the market. And we had gone I'd say probably about a year earlier, we were writing about a new NFT product launch probably every week at least, or every other week. And then it went very, very quiet. And I was thinking, I haven't heard about it for a while. And the very next day, I think, was when the Whiskey Exchange marketplace, the big NFT kind of blockchain sales place launched. And I thought, but that exactly what you're saying. It must have been a big hype.
Yeah.
And then it's quiet. And that's when the building and the proper kind of foundations are laid. Yeah. And then it comes back. Is that kind of a cycle you constantly see, having been in the tech world for a long time?
It is. It definitely, all of those examples, mobile, social, digital, AI is, I can't remember, there's a date somewhere. It's like 30, 40 years old. The first stuff on AI has gone on, and you talk to people that go, I told you it would take off. And it's the same with, with NFTs. I'm sure Whiskey Exchange is a great example. They invested a lot. They built the platform. Unfortunately, they've now kind of set that to a side and aren't investing it anymore. But there'll be a tech guy in that business that comes back in 10 years time and says, I told you so, you should have just trusted me, but wrong time. The consumers aren't quite ready for it yet. The audience that's there doesn't necessarily understand the technology, but the underlying technology is good. It's, is it the right time? Our audiences in their digital journeys, ready for that type of innovation and technology. We actually, in the stuff we're doing with Proof 8, when we first started and talking to distilleries, we were going in there with sales decks that said, we will totally disrupt your industry, biggest innovation ever, revolutionary, blockchain, all of this stuff. And now it's much more around, we can save you 30% in production costs, and we can reduce your time to market, and we can give you greater transparency. It's all benefits led and not about the technology at the minute, because that's coming, unlocking new ownership models, all of that stuff. If you're not ready for it now, you don't need to be, but you can still start doing some of the technology changes that can gear you up for the future, which I think is what Whiskey Exchange has done with their NFT product.
No, absolutely. And I think QR codes, I think, is another one that always comes to mind, because that's been around for years, but it wasn't until COVID kind of forced a need for it that we've really kind of embraced it now these days.
Yeah, I wrote an article that in a publication in 2010, which was headline "QR codes are dead." And then this day will never take off type of article. And of course, COVID came and suddenly they're everywhere. And there's a huge amount in the drink space actually going on with lots of the big holding companies around. How can we at scale put that type of technology onto their products? So that's an area I've done lots in terms of connected packaging. And I'm a real believer that, you have more bottles of spirits in the hands and homes of your consumers than there are outdoor advertising spaces or you can spend on media. So I still think that's a massive channel that's been in a bit of the trough of disillusionment, but will come back out with real world use cases.
Can you go into a bit more detail about that in terms of the benefits of brands providing that extra bit of information using technology?
Yeah, well, connected packaging as an example. So whether you're building a QR code onto the side of your bottle or integrating more advanced technology like NFC so that you can just tap, that opportunity, your best customers are probably your existing customers in terms of, upsell, cross-sell, recommendations. So they are the ones to connect with. And what have they got of your products that exist is your bottle in their hands, most likely. So to put some technology on there that allows you to connect directly with that consumer is almost no-brainer for me. I don't know why brands wouldn't be doing that. The other thing with that, when I go into Diageo or Pernod and I'm talking to them about it, a lot of the expectation is that 100% of my world would do something with this. So if I put a QR code on a bottle, success is 100% of my audiences tap or scan that bottle. But the truth of it is, you think like a Diageo, I don't know, 80 billion bottles a year, 60 billion bottles, something crazy around the amount of bottles that they produce and go out into the world. They need like 1 or 2% of those bottles to be tapped or scanned, not 100%, to give a media value of millions. What they'd be spending in advertising elsewhere to reach that end consumer, that is just amazing media return for them for what is a relatively small expense, build an experience that sits behind it, create a connection point.
So again, maybe on the scale of it, a smaller way for brands to be able to digitalize a bit more and offer that extra touch point for consumers. But again, it might be a longer term investment in a way to kind of see that uptake from the consumer side.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually for smaller brands, that's another opportunity. When it's hardest to get your media budget and spend money is, when you're starting off. So what an opportunity to reconnect with people that are sampling your product or purchasing your product.
Absolutely. And just going back to NFTs as well, what demand are you seeing for NFTs, and what do you think is the benefit from the customer perspective of owning an NFT bottle rather than just your regular physical bottle?
So I guess on this story, so I took the strategic decision with our business that we would kind of focus far less on our NFT style platform, which is a platform called Cask, and much more into our prefate distillery management, warehousing management software. And then Trump gets elected, who's a big NFT kind of crypto believer, and we suddenly come out into another hype cycle with NFTs, I guess. So it's an ever-changing world. One of your panelists again earlier said around that, your planning cycle might have been 10 years or 5 years in the past as your long-term plan. Maybe 6 months, a year or 2 years is your long-term plan at the minute. So there is more interest in NFTs again. Truthfully, I think we're still finding the genuine use case for brands. So if you can find a genuine use case, and we're doing lots of work with customers to help them do that, I'd look at that. I wouldn't be going out as a drinks brand now going, I'm starting off, I'm going to make this an NFT enabled bottle because it sounds cool. You've got to be finding that real, what's the reason to do it? One of the things that we talk about a lot is when we are putting this type of software into a distillery, for example, all of a sudden, all of their assets, whether it's a cask or a barrel that's being filled, or it's something else they're producing, or it's the end bottle, they're all being digitalized on a system and being given what we call a digital twin or a digital identity. And that is that first stage, whether it then ends up being a bottle that's connected or carries an NFT, or can be traded online via an NFT. It doesn't really matter. You've started off on that. I'm digitalizing my operation, so therefore I can do these things if I want to in the future.
We hear so much about digital advancements like AI and ChatGPT and all those sorts of things. What advice do you have for any spirits industry professionals to ensure they're not being left behind by such a fast-moving industry?
Get involved. For the barriers to AI in particular, more than they were for the internet, we still needed. It's really tricky for, obviously, coming more from my marketing agency background. And having lots of friends still in that space, that is an industry that's being disrupted beyond belief. Because when it was the first round of the internet and mobile and then social, you still needed specialists to help you do things. Now there's a bit of that with AI, but you can get started almost instantly yourselves. Download the tools, start playing, get some of your existing Excel data that you might have within your operations and put that into one of these tools, whether it's Grok or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever system you might be interested in using, and you can do some of that stuff for free, or for not many dollars a month could be trialing that technology. And there has never been so low barriers. You don't need infrastructure, you don't need hardware, you don't need lots of costs. So probably the easiest bit of advice is just get involved now. And with all of those things, I think the World Economics Forum, and I love all my stats, but with another stat have said we're going to see as much disruption as we've seen in the last 40 years, last 4 decades, in the next 5 years. And they talk about some of that disruption in the last 40 years and things like MRI scanners and all of the tech that we've had, the internet, mobile, all of that stuff that we've seen disrupted. And we're going to see that same amount of disruption in the next 5 years. So whenever I'm talking to people and they're like, yeah, but we're not quite ready, or this might not be right for us, or I think that's a long way off. It's like, no, this stuff's coming fast. You need to start getting involved now. And definitely if I was starting off a drinks brand and it's a crowded marketplace in a tough environment, I'd be looking at these type of opportunities that technology can bring to my business to either be more efficient or stand out on shelf or do something a bit different.
I think that's really good advice. I think especially if we take it back to what we were saying previously about e-commerce and how behind we were in that sense, I think we really realized all of a sudden how much we were and the importance of catching up very quickly. So if we can get ahead of the game, if it's moving so much quicker, all the more important to get ahead of the game and get started, as you said.
Yeah, there was someone said to me, again, in a bigger company, but was saying about the regulatory challenges and the risk for organizations, because it is uncharted territory to a degree. So and we were talking about that, and the kind of decision that a lot of big companies are taking as well is they've just got to take the risks. Their legal teams can't keep up, HR teams can't keep up with the rate of change. You've got to do it, come from a good place, try and do things ethically, try and put in the processes you can, but also know that this is a time where we've got to take some risks and it might not be right. And we were talking about they're automating their marketing content with amazing results. So, Johnny Walker creating a social media ad at that time might have had an agency working on it, and then another company doing 300 adaptions, and now AI is doing all of that for them from the origination of the first content. But then that brings up questions like, if you're being served an ad that knows you very well and is giving you almost a personalized piece of content, should I tell you that has been created by AI, or should I not? And all of those questions are going to come up and be challenges for us, but you have to do it and create that content, do it in the best way that you can, do it from a good place, but not be held back by, well, there's not a law to cover that, or that might be risky, or to a degree, without doing anything too crazy.
It is such an interesting development. I think takes it back to the transparency thing, right? But that's how you also make good business relationships, as you build that trust with your consumer, with your customer, whether it's within the trade, whether it's D2C or B2B. We know that it is a challenging economic environment at the moment that we're in. What do you think makes it a financial benefit for companies to be investing in technology now to improve the efficiency of how they work when times are hard?
Well, for me, it's almost the better option, because you've got in a business, you've got a few levers to pull. You have to go out and sell more stuff if it's tough times, don't you? Or diversify your product or build bigger portfolios, which is obviously hard and takes time. You have to remove cost out of a business, which none of us want to do, because a lot of these organizations, that cost is people. Or you have to operate more efficiently. You have to make more out of what you've got. And again, some of the other panel discussions you've had are talking about that at every layer, trying to find the margin that means you minimize what's passed on to a consumer, which is another issue. And that for me is what these technologies can do now. They can make your production more efficient. They can make your supply chain more visible so that you can see the gaps in that supply chain end to end. You know, Diageo's massive share price drop last year or the year before because they couldn't see what was going on in distributors in Latin America. I looked at that and was like, if their product had been connected and if we'd been seeing a 3% average scan rate and we'd seen that drop off, we would have known there was less product in the market. Like, digital could have given them that transparency without needing to fix the distributor models and all of that stuff. So it might not even be the use case you're thinking of now, but there are some really obvious ones. You know, AI in that marketing context can give a startup, a one-person startup can suddenly have a 10-person marketing team because they're using AI efficiently to create their brand and go out and sell to the market, in the same way that a brand that might be in difficult times can use that technology to be a bit more efficient, to save some costs in the business.
And for you, in terms of efficiency, is it worth it, do you think, for brands to look at one area of their company and their business, and, you know, if that's where they can afford to put the investment and make that way of working more efficient using tech, is that worth it in your view? Or do you have to take a more overall view, you know, from start to finish to really feel the benefits?
I think there's a benefit to look strategically at the whole business if you can, but 100% take a business unit or take a location or take one warehouse and test and learn in that space, rather than, you don't have to invest in the whole organization. Actually, probably better off taking some isolated use cases and starting smaller and learning and adapting quickly. So I definitely agree with that. And we're doing it all the time. We take one distillery in a group, or we take one warehouse amongst a few warehouses and optimize that and implement the technology in that space, and bring people along for the journey. Because that's the other thing, this disruption. Pernod, in a talk they were doing recently, talked about that as well, is all of this causes massive uncertainty amongst employees and amongst our teams, and we're all on a learning journey as well. I mean, there are very few, this Paris summit, there were some really top AI experts, but actually, truth is, most of the rest of us are totally winging it and learning as we go, learning in our own lives. It's so I think that's another thing. By taking smaller parts of a business, you can kind of bring everyone along for the journey rather than mass disruption.
And the spirits industry is an industry that really prides itself on tradition and storytelling, and there's so much heritage and provenance across brands, across different categories. Do you think that we will be able to balance the two? Do you have to sacrifice tradition to be more technologically advanced?
You definitely don't. And I'm sure that's the reason why lots of people here as well. And we've all, coming all from a tech background, Nim, the co-founder, is from a financial services background, so even more dull than kind of tech. And we've all absolutely fallen in love with the craft and the heritage and the storytelling, the 5 generations that are distilling a whiskey up in Scotland. All of that stuff absolutely has to remain and be protected, and doesn't have to change. You know, the technology we're putting in is kind of built in a way that's easy to use and friendly, and most of us are familiar with it in our own lives anyway, through using our iPhones and laptops and things like that. So we have to retain that, and actually some of what we're doing is able to bring that story better to an end consumer and tell it a bit more, because that's one of the other things. Half of these stories, unless you're visiting that distillery up in Scotland or wherever you are in the world, you don't actually get that whole story come across. And I think technology and creativity definitely can help tell that story to the end consumer as well, and that's a brilliant opportunity.
So definitely more about harnessing how you use it to continue that storytelling rather than replacing anything at all.
Definitely. And when we talk to a master distiller, we'll say this is about you doing the bits you're brilliant at and you love, not sat trying to scramble through a logbook in a back office. Like that, take that bit away and go back to the craft and the wonderful bits you're doing. And unfortunately, we talked about it already, but the kind of regulatory requirements and health and safety requirements, all that, have just putting more paperwork onus into these people. So far better, let's get that away, let's operationalize that, let the systems and the tech do the boring bits, and yeah, you go back to the wonderful bits.
Yeah, less admin sounds
less admin
great.
for all of us. We're all up for that.
Thank you so much, Rob. We have some time for some questions from the floor. If anybody would like to ask anything to Rob while we have him up here.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question. As it's now obligatory to have the QR label on wine bottles in the back for like ingredients and so on, how can you use it for yourself?
Did you say as it is now required on wines?
Yes.
Yeah. There is some debate, and I need to get more up to speed with this around whether you can serve marketing materials from a scan of that same QR code. But there is definitely an opportunity to do both there. So obviously the compliance, we're seeing a lot come around digital product passports is a really hot topic at the moment, particularly in fashion. I think it's been rolled out to batteries first. It's now coming to fashion, is where there will have to be a QR code or NFC tag in those products. And they will have to do all of the regulatory stuff and show the full supply chain, planetary impact, environmental impact on those things. But there is also a massive demand from consumers to know more, to be rewarded for loyalty, to get product garment instructions or drinking instructions or recipe instructions. So they need to do a dual job of kind of consumer engagement and regulatory work. And that's a bit down to us to make sure that experience can handle both. You know, I'm here for a product check for authentication, to look at ingredients, or I'm here to find out about the master distiller or learn more about the brand. So I think there's a job to do for those dual type of things. There is just a little bit of a regulatory issue coming around. Can you do that if I'm scanning for a functional purpose? Can you serve marketing content? Which I think's just got to be overcome, because there's not enough space to have multiple QR codes sat on a bottle. We're already tight on real estate, so that's not an option. But yeah.
Hello. Are you worried in the short term that from a marketing perspective, differentiation is going to drop? Because, you know, you're going through LinkedIn, you go through Insta, and you're seeing a lot of, let's say, churning content. Short term, as we all learn, it might be a negative thing. Long term, positive. What's your thoughts on the use of AI, the use of technology and differentiation? Because that's what a lot of these guys want. But at the same time, it's becoming a little bit samey now, because is that a short-term problem, or is that actually just a problem that we need to train ourselves out of?
So there's a few different things. Our CMO, who I've worked with for decades now, was an ex-creative director, all of the passion of creativity, and we're just starting to convince him that there are some benefits of AI. He's totally like, creativity's dead, the world's over. And I totally get all of that as well. This Johnny Walker example that I mentioned, looked to me as it was a brilliant piece of advertising, social media piece of content, shows the bottle, and, you know, they say this is Christmas campaign, Johnny Walker red labeled, it forms the ad for them. And the example that they go on then to show is that then, you know, they would have done that ad for maybe 5 consumer profiles, because then they've got 10 channels and 30 languages and all of that stuff. They'll now do it for hundreds and hundreds of different consumer profiles. And it's right the way down to the specifics of, it knows me and my age and my location in London. And when they were demonstrating that stuff, I was looking at it and going, actually, the creativity is more personal, more engaging, more relevant to me, more specific, all of those good things. Actually, it's better creativity. But there's going to be a time of finding out those places for us. Another good example of that is the CEO of Goldman Sachs has just put out a thing. It was part of that Paris AI summit, but it used to take a team of 8 business analysts at Goldman Sachs 6 weeks to prepare a company for IPO. And they've now got 95% of it automated using AI. And it's just that last 5% that they're saying now they'll charge exactly the same amount of money. They'll do it far faster. It will be more robust. But it's that 5% of real creativity and talent, or in their case, you know, brains and experience that adds the value. And I think that's going to be the same for creativity. that 5% we can layer on top. We are in a bit of a middle ground though. LinkedIn's a brilliant example where you can see the algorithm is trying to fix this generic kind of rubbish that's coming through from AI. But it's in the middle ground of not quite getting there yet. But hopefully yeah.
All good. Well, if you do want to hear any more about Proof A and about technology, Rob and I actually recorded a podcast episode recently too. So you can listen to that at the Spirits Business podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon, or on the Spirits Business website. But please put your hands together for Rob. You've been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Lisa, thanks.